We welcome to the program now. It's Senator Chris Johnson. He represents District 45 that incorporates Forest and Perry County, serves as the chair of the Senate Government Structure Committee and the vice chair of the Senate Finance Committee. Senator, always good to see you, sir.
Great to see you as well. Thanks for having me on today.
You bet, and appreciate you coming down. I know it's an extremely busy day, and so very grateful that you accepted the invitation. I suggested this to Alex, our content director, yesterday because I knew you were going to be taking up this PERS restructuring bill that, of the board that came out of the House, HB 1590. You've conducted a hearing on it. I attended that hearing, one of the longer ones maybe I've ever seen there, Senator, about 2.5 hours, I think.
It was. Of course, we had Cass Sunstein on for the first 30 minutes, which I've always really appreciated the way that he thinks about government. And you notice he talked about the tax on people's time, which from my perspective is important, and I value his approach to finding ways to make government more efficient so that we waste people's time a lot less than we do now.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. You had 3 members of the board. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then also Mayor Toby Barker,
yes,
there in Forest County at Hattiesburg, who once again just wanted to come forward on behalf of the municipalities and say, look, if you impose this additional employer contribution rate, we at the municipal level don't have the luxury of just appropriating more money that we do at the state level to cover that additional expense. We'd have to make some changes. That could come in the form of increasing property taxes. It could come in the form of maybe letting some people go or replacing some full-time equivalent employees with contract employees. I mean, a number of different actions.
That's exactly right, and that's not limited to Hattiesburg. That's
right.
Municipalities, counties, and some institutions of higher learning. I think a lot of people will look at that.
School districts?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. Well, so it was a good discussion. It's not really a debate. I almost said that. It really wasn't a debate. It was just a discussion. You guys were there to collect information from people that could offer that information. Members of the board also spoke very passionately about their concerns about the future of the program and what action should be taken, and they offered some concerns about this restructuring proposal.
That's exactly right, and it was a great opportunity for us as senators to hear from board members. We had heard at that time from many retirees or state employees from around the state, but we had not heard from board members, or most of the committee had not. So it's a good opportunity for us to hear from them and better understand their line of thinking and what they're looking for.
I thought the members asked very good, meaningful, direct questions. I know Senator Sparks spent some time just questioning the wisdom of backing down on the target rate of return from 7.75 down to 7.55 and now down to 7.
Yes.
Talking about the return on the PERS investment portfolio, which is just under $34 billion at this point. And one of the members, as I recall, I can't remember which one, said they actually voted against that move, right?
Yes, and I thought that point was a great one. That it was Randy McCoy from the Tupelo, Lee County area. And I thought his point was great, and it's how many of the senators feel, is that that while getting to 7% is a good conservative figure, it's not a bad thing to get to. The dropping it down so quickly mattered, and each 0.25% cost $2 billion in that liability.
Yeah.
So when you talk 7.75 to 7, that's a $6 billion swing in liabilities just on paper, and I think that's one of the big issues is if they had not made that change, it's a $6 billion swing the other way.
Yeah.
And it didn't change how much money we have in assets. It just changed how the liabilities looked on paper.
And then you wonder, to what extent does it actually change the allocation of capital from the money managers? I mean, are they going to manage just to do 7, or are they going to, optimize their investment to produce as much as they can within certain risk framework?
That's a very valid point, because we want them to make as much money as we can.
Sure.
And then at the same time, we also want them to limit our losses.
Exactly.
And sometimes those don't always match up, but we sure don't want them to back off of opportunities because we lowered our target rate.
Yeah. And I'm not suggesting that they would. We don't really know, honestly. And something I've suggested to you is maybe we need to bring some money managers in to come talk about that aspect, because the board probably has more influence, I would say, over that than they do anything else. That's not really something the legislature oversees. directly the way the board does. That's really more standard sort of corporate board governance, whereas the benefits, that's the purview of the legislature.
That's right. And so, the board has a handful of things that they're responsible for, that being one of them. And then the employer rate amount is
they
also
can do that too.
One that they have. The legislature, the board is doing for their members what their members want them to do. And as legislators, we essentially have members that we're elected by, and it's the entire state. And so, it's our job to take information, discern what is needed, and then make decisions. However, I think that there was some misinformation or misleading information that got out about benefits. And yes, the state can set benefits, but the only thing that we've looked at is adding a new tier. So for new hires, the benefits may be different than previous tiers. But for existing tiers, nothing ever came across my desk that said we want to change benefits on existing tiers. Keeping those in place is one of the things that we're looking at, ensuring that people understand in any amendment we may make to 1590.
It's an important message for the PERS members because I think anytime, just human nature, you're looking at change, and this would be a rather significant change, there's always the fear of the unknown. And that's a reasonable, rational fear. I think that's just human nature, as I said. But the fact is, the board can't change benefits. Only the legislature can do that. This is in statute. And honestly, I think, Senator, you and I have talked about this, my opinion. If you guys did that, it'd likely land us in court, consume a bunch of time and costs to defend the action of reducing benefits, and we'd likely lose, honestly.
That's right. I'm not an attorney, but I believe that that's how that would play out. In addition, I think we have a moral obligation. I know you're in business. I'm in business. I've made some great deals, and I've made some deals that weren't so great for me.
Sure.
But you just stick with them, and it's just part of your moral obligation and your credibility. If you don't do that, people worry about the legislature changing benefits. Not only do I think we would go to court and lose, I also think that we would be setting a tone for any future hires.
Agree.
And that would hurt the state long term more than anything. And so I don't believe that that the legislature changing benefits would ever gain any traction, because I don't think it sends a positive message.
And I wonder also, Senator, to the extent to which the ratings agencies would consider that as well. I mean, it's not directly related to our debt and our repayment practices against that debt, but I'm not so sure that making such a change like that, especially if we got drug into court, wouldn't affect the third parties who rate our agencies. And for our audience, that simply means that when we do borrow money, if we ever have to go back to the well for that, we'd pay a higher interest rate.
Yes, and it very possibly could. Again, nothing in the bill that the House passed or anything that we've looked at on the Senate side would have a benefits change. So,
let's be clear about that.
And so we want to make sure that people know that the benefit change is not on the table. That's not anything we're looking at.
And I think it's also fair to say, get your take on this, no action probably produces a bad outcome if we don't do anything whatsoever.
Yes, and I think for two reasons. One is there is a lot of fear out there. There's fear that the legislature change benefits. There's also fear that the PERS is not sound, and that's actually not the case. Again, a lot of our assets are fixed. They're on paper. They fluctuate with the market and the additional money we put in. But the liabilities, they can fluctuate. 2 years ago, we were on track to be very well funded, and then changes in estimated numbers has made that look not the case. And so I think that we need to reassure people that the financial ability of PERS is sound to pay retirees both now and in the future. I
checked with the PERS folks. They've been very responsive, very accommodating, good people over there. And they said, I asked point blank, based on doing nothing, when do we get to the point where the fund would no longer be able to meet its benefit obligations 100%? They said 30 years.
Yes.
So, is that your understanding as well? Have you heard that?
That's my understanding.
Okay.
They said unless the market just completely collapses,
Sure.
which then we're all in trouble.
It's all actuarial estimates.
That's right. But yes, I believe that our $34 billion roughly will sustain us for quite some time in paying retirees.
Yeah. I mean, it's that plus just all the other actuarial inputs of people coming in and paying in and people retiring and drawing out, and they figured all that into the equation. But basically, it's at 30 years when those numbers don't work out. But that could change, as you know, due to a lot of factors.
And if we come up with a new tier for new hires, that could also move the needle some.
It could, yeah. We got Senator Chris Johnson. If you can hang around, we'll address some other issues going on down there at the legislature.
Happy to.
We got Senator Chris Johnson once again in the Element Well studio. We've got Senator Chris Johnson. So you and I have talked about the supplemental legislative retirement program. There's this misconception, I think is a way to put it, that the SLRP program has had a negative impact on the broader PERS program. They're totally separate funds, but it's just not true. They're not related. They don't touch each other. And yeah, if we had the 150 people that are paying into the SLRP program, paying into PERS, sure, it would produce more revenue, but in the scheme of things, when you got, 118,000 or something like that paying into it, 150 isn't going to move the needle whatsoever.
And especially not at the pay rate we have.
That's true. That's exactly right. Whose pay is, I think, significantly lower than the average pay of a public sector worker, talking about legislative pay. And that's after you add on the expense reimbursements and all that stuff. So I get it. I think there's just general sort of lack of trust of elected leaders, like it or not, and this feeling that, well, they have this special thing over here, and that's causing all the problems. But we certainly could debate whether or not the SLRP program even needs to be in existence, whether or not the legislators should have a separate retirement program that is supplemental to the PERS program, which they also participate in. But from a math and finance perspective, we could drain all the money out of it right now and put it in PERS, which would also be somewhat illegal, I think, because people paid into it. Legislators paid into it. You take the money they paid into it and put it in a program that gets distributed to everybody in the PERS program, essentially. But that won't change the financial problems or challenges that PERS is dealing with. It's a tiny amount of money.
It is a tiny amount of money and would not even be noticeable in our
it's a rounding
assets.
error, essentially. But it might, I suggested to you guys, and maybe you ought to think about phasing it out.
Yes.
And it would send the message, I think, of good faith and goodwill, I think, as you put it, that, okay, guys, we get it, that we have this supplemental plan, which was, by the way, here before almost anybody that's in there now got to the House or Senate.
And
the
frankly,
80s.
I had to look it up to see what it even was.
That's what everybody tells me. And if you work for it, by the way, you have to work 8 years, just like you do in PERS, to vest, and you're not vested in the SLRP program until you're vested in PERS. They follow the same rules.
Yes.
So if you qualified and you were elected to 2 terms and served 8 years, I actually went to the PERS calculator and plugged in the average pay of a legislature is $40K. And if you plug that in, and they serve 2 terms, minimum 8 years, their benefit's $235 a month. I don't think anybody down there is serving for $235 a month per retirement.
No. And most of us, we give up a significant part of our lives, including income-producing time, to serve in the legislature.
Sure.
It truly is public service.
Yeah, and you know that going into it.
That's right.
So I just want to make the point that maybe it makes sense just from the optics perspective, as they say, to think about phasing the thing out. But you gotta take care of existing obligations, just like we're talking about on the PERS side. It's the same thing applies.
That's exactly right. And I think that we can look at just like a new tier. Maybe we could also look at phasing out SLRP through that. There's so many things that as I've learned more about PERS that I think that we should have more hearings on and dive into, because there's a tremendous amount of information that I think not only do most people not know, but most legislators don't have either. And it's been an educational experience to dive in and try to understand PERS system better.
Sure. Well, I think the good news is that we've had more conversations about it in any year that I can remember, honestly.
Yes.
This year. And it's not just because the House filed a bill to address the board structure, but even beyond that, outside of that, there's been a lot of conversations about the program and the need to take a hard look at it, see if any action needs to be taken and what that action looks like. So I can't remember ever members of the board being in the Capitol to testify, for example. I think that's been a while since that's occurred.
Not since I've been in the legislature that I recall. And again, I thought it was a great experience, though, for us to get them in and hear directly from them.
Yeah. And
would love to have them back again as we continue PERS conversations.
Yeah, I agree. You need all the brain trust you can get at the table to talk about this and hammer something out. Let's pivot a little bit. Being committee deadline day, explain that. So you got to pass bills out of committee that came from the opposite house, right?
Yes. So this deadline is for general bills and constitutional amendments that originated in the opposite house, and today is the deadline to get them out of committee. So whatever we don't get out of committee dies in the committee today.
Okay. And then the 10th, I believe, is the day for floor action from the other house, right?
That's right, yes. So we have until the 10th to pass those same bills that we pass out through today on the Senate floor. So
then, Senator, between now and then, if something comes out of committee that came from the other house and it got amended, that would require it going to conference. Is that correct?
Yes.
How's that work?
So if we amend a bill in conference or on the floor, and send it back to the House, they have the option to concur and send it on to the governor, or to invite conference, in which case then we get together in small groups and work out where we may have differences and see if we can come to resolution.
So it's not automatic. You could amend it in your House, one that originated in the other, and as long as they concur with it, it's good to go. But if they don't, that would I guess necessitate conference.
And that happens for any number of reasons. Sometimes it's a differing opinion. Sometimes, though, say we pass a bill in the Senate and then we get more information. We go to the House and say, hey, this came up. Would you mind amending to include this? And then we'll concur. And so, that's the thing I think a lot of people don't realize about the legislative process is we do continue to work on bills until they're passed out of both chambers to the governor.
Yeah.
We're always gathering more information, understanding better what some potential consequences are going to be, and try to make improvements to legislation.
What else is on tap for your committee today?
We have a few bills about prison industries and corrections, but obviously 1590 is the big one. Yes.
And that's you're meeting today later this afternoon, right?
This afternoon at 4 p.m.
So I'm seeing the PERS folks encouraging members of PERS to attend that meeting.
Yes, which we had several people attend our hearing, which I thought was fantastic. I think on YouTube it has over 3.7 thousand views, which is a tremendous amount for something as boring as Mississippi Legislature.
Hopefully you're going to have a big room again, right, for this meeting. Is that right?
The big room is taken. We have a much smaller room this time.
What are you going to do? Everybody can't fit in those smaller rooms.
I know, but being deadline day, there's a scrap to get. You just get whatever committee room you can get. We did try to make sure we got a room that has the capability to webcast.
Okay,
and so
I got you.
Anyone that wants to watch can watch live or watch it archived.
I got you. So we got a couple of minutes left. The legislation last week that came out of Senator Blackwell's Medicaid committee that passed, you voted against the measure along with, I think, 15 other senators as well. And this was kind of a scaled-down version, if you will, of Medicaid expansion. What are your thoughts about that?
About the Senate bill particularly?
Yeah.
So I thought the Senate bill offered a better option than the House bill. The House author, Missy McGee, is a close friend of mine.
Yeah.
We're both constituents of each other's. But there are some issues with full-scale Medicaid expansion, as you and I have discussed.
Yeah.
Currently we have, and I think an article this morning said 180,000 people that are within that 100% to 138% of the poverty line would qualify for a full Medicaid expansion are currently on the exchange. And the exchange costs the state $0 and pays about 40% higher to providers than Medicaid would. Mm-hmm. So in a full expansion, I think that hospitals and clinics both lose revenue from what they currently are if those people are switched over to Medicaid, which happens in most states. And so the Senate version avoids that, keeping those 180,000 people on the exchange. And I think in that way, it's a much better plan for Mississippi and most providers. Personally, I am not in favor of any type of expansion. I see the effects of essentially a single payer between Medicare and Medicaid, CMS, in rural areas. If you had more access to care, I think we would have it in rural areas, because already over 80% of patients in rural areas are on Medicare or Medicaid. So I don't think it just solves problems like some people would like to believe.
Gotcha. Senator, always good to see you. Appreciate you coming on, and good luck on the meeting this afternoon.
Well, thank you very much. Great to be here.
We're coming right back in the Element Wealth studio.